Today is February 15th. It's the 46th day of the year, and this is the On This Day podcast. If you've been listening from the start, some of this may sound a little familiar, and if you haven't, it'll all be new to you. Either way, enjoy the show. Today is Susan B. Anthony Day in the United States, commemorating the birth of Susan B. Anthony on this day in 1820. In her early 30s, Anthony takes up the cause of women's suffrage as the right which women need above all others, the right to vote. Within a decade, she is a leader of the movement along with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, forming the Women's Loyal National League, the first national women's political organization. In 1872, Anthony is arrested in Rochester, New York, for voting. That's it, just for voting. In 1878, Anthony and Stanton petition Congress to amend the Constitution giving women the right to vote. The legal right of women to vote is not secured nationally until the passage of the 19th Amendment, 100 years after Anthony's birth. In 1979, Susan B. Anthony is honored by being selected as the face of a new dollar coin the U.S. Mint adds to circulation. However, once in circulation, the coin, emblazoned with her profile, is widely rejected due to its close similarity in look and feel to the quarter coin. People mistakenly spend dollars when they mean to spend quarters, and this is 1979, when a dollar actually means something. If it had been a different size or shape or weight, like a British pound coin or a Canadian loonie or toonie, it might have caught on. But the chosen design is the one favored by the powerful vending machine lobby. No kidding. On this day in 1898, the USS Maine explodes in Havana Harbor. Launched 9 years earlier from the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the armored USS Maine is made of 12-inch nickel steel with 4 10-inch guns and 4 above-water torpedo tubes. It's designed and built as a response to Brazil's acquisition of the battleship Riachuelo, a modern armored warship that can devastate the existing American fleet all by itself. In 1898, 3 years since the start of the Cuban War of Independence from Spain, the USS Maine is stationed in Havana Harbor to protect U.S. interests. A little before 10 p.m. at night on this day in 1898, 5 tons of powder charges for the ship's guns explode in the forward magazine. Maine sinks within minutes, killing 261 and injuring 78 crew members. Newspapers run by Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst go crazy with the story and point the finger of blame at Spain. Editors of their papers, the New York Journal and the New York World, go so far as to make up stories to fit their narrative, the epitome of the so-called yellow journalism they've been practicing in the mid to late 1890s. An official inquiry at the time concludes the USS Maine was mined, and cries of "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," are heard all across the country. The pre-existing tensions with Spain heat up, and by April 1898, the U.S. and Spain are at war. It's a short war, though, only lasts about 10 weeks. It's the first time America plays world police. Later investigations conclude that the cause of the USS Maine explosion is of internal origin, possibly caused by a fire in a coal bunker located near the forward magazine. Meanwhile, in Cuba, well, they think that the U.S. deliberately blows up its own ship as an excuse to take over Cuba. On this day in 1933, President-elect Franklin Roosevelt gives a speech in Bayfront Park, Miami, Florida. Afterwards, he sits in the back seat of a convertible and shakes hands, motioning for Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak to come over and say hello. At that same moment, an Italian immigrant named Giuseppe Zangara fires a .32 caliber pistol 6 times at Roosevelt and his entourage. Zangara is short and has to stand on a folding chair to get a clear shot. And when he fires his first shot, people around him immediately grab at him and pull him off balance. With the 6 shots he fires on this day in 1933, he hits 5 people, none of which are President-elect Roosevelt. One of those hit, though, is Mayor Cermak, who's struck in the abdomen. Cermak reportedly tells Roosevelt, quote, "I'm glad it was me and not you." Words that are inscribed on a plaque marking the spot in Bayfront Park. Zangara's reason for firing is that he hates rich and powerful people and politicians. Zangara pleads guilty and is sentenced to 80 years in prison. But when Mayor Anton Cermak dies of his wound 3 weeks after the shooting, the charge of murder is added, to which Zangara also pleads guilty. Giuseppe Zangara is sentenced to death and is executed 10 days later. After nearly a decade in Afghanistan, the last Soviet troops withdraw on this day in 1989. Soviet troops first enter Afghanistan in December 1979 with orders to support the communist government in their battle against Muslim rebels. Before long, the Soviets meet intense resistance and get bogged down in a stalemate with the Mujahideen, the rebel group who is given military support by the United States, first by President Carter in July of 1979, and then under President Reagan throughout the 1980s. The Soviet occupation of Afghanistan causes millions of Afghan casualties and creates over 5 million Afghan refugees who flee to Pakistan and Iran. The Afghan front is a costly one for the Russians, who by the late 1980s are in the midst of an economic crisis at home. And after 9 years in Afghanistan, they've accomplished nothing. So in 1988, the decision is made to pull out. An agreement is signed, and on this day in 1989, a column of tanks drives across the Afghan-Uzbek bridge from Afghanistan to Soviet-controlled Uzbekistan. They are followed across the bridge, also known as the Friendship Bridge, by Colonel General Boris Gromov, the last Soviet officer to leave Afghanistan. Afghans rejoice, but the internal conflict between the communist government and the Mujahideen continues, and Afghanistan remains mired in a bloody conflict after the Soviets' departure. Around 9 in the morning on this day in 2013, a meteor explodes over the Russian city of Chelyabinsk, east of the Ural Mountains and just north of Kazakhstan. The meteor is approximately 65 feet wide and is traveling 12 miles a second when it streaks across the sky, a fireball 30 times brighter than the sun. The shockwave smashes thousands of windows and causes a factory roof to collapse. When the meteor explodes, the power of the blast is estimated at somewhere between 400 and 600 kilotons of TNT. And it's all captured by hundreds of dashboard and security cameras, and those videos are viewed millions of times online. Almost 1,500 people are injured, many people directly below the blast, receiving skin and retinal burns. According to NASA, an asteroid this size hits Earth about once every 100 years. NASA studies the meteorites that land on the ground and satellite data of the event to learn more about what asteroid it came from and what other asteroids might come this close to Earth in the future. The UN Office for Outer Space Affairs proposes an asteroid warning system. But as for the meteor that streaks through the Russian sky on this day in 2013, no one knew it was coming. There are 320 days left in the year.